Her small hands were cold as they grasped the edge of the true alpha's sleeve. Tears mixed with the streaks of dried blood on her cheeks, and her small voice trembled with raw terror. "They're hurting my mama. She's dying." The room's controlled hum died instantly. Crystal glasses froze midair. Every golden, silver, and crimson eye snapped to the king's table. But the man she had chosen to beg was no ordinary shifter. He was Theo Raeken, the true Alpha King. The most feared shapeshifter on the entire continent. And what he did next would send shockwaves through every pack, den, and territory from coast to coast. Stay with me until the end because this story will leave you breathless. Now, let's get into it. The Sovereign's Domain, a Tuesday evening, present day. The private council chamber hummed with the low, dangerous energy of apex predators conducting business. This wasn't just any establishment. This was the heart of Theo Raeken's empire, a sprawling, multi-species territory that stretched across 7 states and answered to one law, his. Every server knew to keep their movements silent and their gazes down. Every shifter present understood the unspoken hierarchy. You showed respect. You controlled your instincts. And you never, ever, disrupted the true Alpha's council. Theo Raeken sat at the head of an obsidian table, a commanding presence whose sheer authority made the air itself feel heavier. At 35, he had built a dynasty that lesser alphas could only dream of. His long dark hair framed a face carved from stone and shadow. His eyes, normally a penetrating dark brown, held the weight of 1,000 calculated decisions. And tonight, like every Tuesday for the past decade, he was conducting his weekly strategic session with his most trusted lieutenants. The conversation flowed in measured tones. Territory disputes were assessed. Pack dynamics were analyzed. Threats were neutralized with surgical precision. This was how Theo operated. Methodical, calculated, emotions buried so deep they might as well not exist. He had survived where countless alphas had fallen because he understood one fundamental truth: sentiment was a flaw. And flaws got you destroyed. His philosophy was simple: order is the only survival. The shifters around him were powerful in their own right: wolves, bears, even a pair of sleek panthers who served as his intelligence network. But none of them possessed what made Theo truly exceptional. He was a true alpha, a shapeshifter whose power didn't come from bloodline or bite, but from sheer force of will. His authority was absolute. His word was law. And his control over his primal nature was legendary. For 15 years, since the territory wars that had nearly destroyed everything, Theo had maintained that iron control. He had locked away the raw, protective instincts that defined his shifter nature because those instincts made you vulnerable. They made you reckless. They made you choose feeling over strategy. And in his world, that got people killed. But then something happened that would shatter every carefully constructed wall the true Alpha King had built around his heart. The chamber's reinforced doors, designed to withstand a full shifted grizzly, burst open with such force that the ancient would cracked against the stone wall. Every head turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. The 2 panther shifters hissed, their eyes flashing gold in warning. But before Theo's elite guards could intercept the intruder, everyone saw what had caused the breach. A little girl, no more than 7 years old, stood trembling in the doorway. Her clothes were torn and splattered with mud. Blood, human blood, the scent was unmistakable, stained her small pink shirt. Her tangled hair hung around a face streaked with tears and dirt. She looked like she had run through a war zone to get here. The child's eyes swept the room desperately, searching for something. Someone, anyone who might have the power to help her. The shifters stared back in stunned silence. Some averted their gazes, uncomfortable with the raw desperation. Others tensed, viewing her as a security breach, a potential threat to be neutralized. But the little girl wasn't looking for sympathy, she was looking for salvation. Her gaze locked onto Theo Raeken's table, and something in those innocent, terror-filled eyes recognized power when she saw it. Maybe it was the way every predator in the room deferred to him. Maybe it was the dark, intricately embroidered coat that marked his rank. Maybe it was the silver chains of office that caught the light. Or maybe, just maybe, it was something deeper. A child's instinct recognizing the one creature in that room who possessed the raw strength to actually do something. Without hesitation, she ran, straight toward the true Alpha King. The room held its collective breath. Every shifter present felt the shift in the air, that electric moment before violence erupts. Theo's personal guards moved, their enhanced reflexes putting them between their king and the unknown threat. Hands reached for concealed weapons. Eyes began to glow with the warning signs of partial transformation. This was unprecedented. No one approached Theo Raeken uninvited. Not pack leaders. Not rival alphas. And certainly not human children who somehow breached his most secure location. But before anyone could intercept her, the little girl reached Theo's table. She grabbed his sleeve with both hands, those small, desperate fingers clutching the dark fabric like it was the only thing anchoring her to sanity. And then she spoke the words that would echo in the true alpha's mind for the rest of his immortal life. "They're hurting my mama. She's dying." The silence that followed was absolute. You could have heard a heartbeat in that chamber. Every eye was on Theo, waiting to see how the legendary true Alpha King, the shifter who had executed challengers without mercy, who had dissolved entire packs for breaking his laws, who hadn't shown compassion in over a decade, would handle this impossible situation. His reputation was built on being untouchable, unfeeling. A creature who had transcended the weaknesses that destroyed lesser alphas. Theo looked down at the child clinging to his arm. Her face was turned up toward his, those brown eyes wide with the kind of desperate hope that only the truly innocent can possess. Her small chest heaved with panicked breaths. The scent of her mother's blood mixed with the salt of her tears. And in that moment, something shifted deep in the true Alpha's chest, something he hadn't felt in 15 years. His eyes, those dark, calculating eyes that had stared down countless enemies, began to glow. Not the golden amber of a common wolf, not the silver of a born alpha, but a deep, burning crimson. The unmistakable mark of a true alpha whose protective instinct had just been triggered. You see, Theo Raeken hadn't always been the cold, methodical king that the shifter world feared. Once upon a time, he had been something different, something more dangerous. A protector who would burn the world to ash for those he claimed as his own. The shifters around the table recoiled instinctively, not from the child, but from what they sensed awakening in their king. The two panthers backed toward the wall, their ears flattening. One of the wolf lieutenants actually whimpered, a sound no one in that room would ever admit to hearing. Even the most dominant among them felt it, that primal pressure that made every animal instinct scream to submit or flee. Theo Raeken stared down at the small girl clinging to his sleeve, and for the first time in 15 years, the carefully constructed mask he wore threatened to crack completely. He saw himself in her desperation. Not as he was now, but as he had been, young, powerless, watching everything he loved burn because he hadn't been strong enough, controlled enough, ruthless enough to stop it. The memory hit him like a physical blow. 15 years ago, during the territory wars, Theo had been different. He had led with his heart, with the fierce protective instinct that defined true alphas. He had believed that strength and loyalty were enough. He had trusted in the pack bonds, in the ancient laws that said shifters protected their own. And he had been wrong. The enemy hadn't come for him directly. They had gone after the ones he couldn't protect, the families, the children, the vulnerable members of the packs under his protection. They had burned homes while he was defending borders. They had slaughtered innocents while he was fighting their warriors. They had taught him the cruelest lesson of his life. A king who led with his heart was a king who got everyone he loved killed. The night it all ended, standing in the ashes of what his protective instincts had failed to save, Theo had made a choice. He had looked at the survivors, the hollow-eyed children, the broken families, the shattered packs, and he had decided that the true alpha they needed wasn't the one who felt deeply and fought fiercely. They needed the one who never felt at all. So he had buried it. That raw, primal drive to protect. That instinct that made true alphas what they were. He had locked it away behind walls of pure logic and ruthless calculation, choosing order over instinct, strategy over sentiment, survival over heart. For 15 years, those walls had held. He had become exactly what he needed to be, unkillable, unshakable, unmoved by pleading or tears or desperation. He had built an empire on the principle that emotion was weakness, and weakness was death. But now this child, this small, terrified girl with blood on her face and hope in her eyes, was looking at him like he was her salvation. Like he was still the protector he had promised himself he would never be again. Her name tumbled from her trembling lips. "I'm Malia. Malia Hales. Please, they said they'd kill her if she didn't pay." But we don't have money. We don't have anything. She tried to make them stop and they just kept. The girl's voice broke completely, dissolving into sobs that shook her entire small frame. Something inside Theo Raeken shattered. The low red glow in his eyes intensified, bleeding from a faint shimmer to a burning crimson that lit the shadows of his face. The temperature in the room dropped as his power flooded outward, no longer restrained by will or reason. This wasn't the calculated authority of a king. This was the raw, unstoppable force of a true alpha whose protective instinct had just been triggered by the one thing that could override 15 years of carefully maintained control. Pure, unprotected innocence. The primal alpha, the creature he had buried to survive, roared back to life. And every shifter in that chamber felt the exact moment the true alpha king stopped thinking like a strategist and started feeling like a predator whose territory had been violated. His voice, when it came, was a low rumble that resonated with alpha command. Who hurt your mother? Theo moved with deliberate slowness, aware that his 6'3" frame and the waves of power rolling off him could terrify the child further. He lowered himself to one knee, bringing his eyes level with hers. The movement was so controlled, so careful, that several of his lieutenants exchanged glances they would later deny making. They had never seen their king kneel for anyone. His voice dropped to a tone none of them had heard in over a decade, soft, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. Tell me their names, little one. Tell me everything. Malia's small hand still clutched his sleeve, but her sobbing had quieted to hiccuping breaths. Up close, she could see that the red glow in his eyes wasn't frightening. It was warm, like embers promising protection rather than destruction. Something in her child's instinct recognized safety when she found it. The blood fangs, she whispered, her voice breaking on the name. That's what they called themselves. They came to our apartment after Mama closed the shop. They said we owed protection money. But Mama's just a florist. She doesn't have pack money. She's human. The temperature in the room dropped another 10 degrees. Ice practically formed on the windows. They told her she had to pay both sides, them and the Silvercrest pack. But she can't. We barely make rent. Malia's words came faster now, tumbling over each other. She tried to explain, but they got angry. Their leader, Ragnar, he said humans in shifter territory pay the territory tax or they pay in blood. And when Mama said she needed that money for my school clothes, he just started. She couldn't finish. The memory was too fresh, too violent for a 7-year-old to articulate. Theo didn't need her to continue. He had heard enough. His jaw tightened as the full picture crystallized. Rogue shifters. Operating without sanction in his territory. Extorting non-combatants. Using violence against a human woman and traumatizing her child. Every word was another violation of the core laws that held his empire together. But worse, so much worse, they had done it in his domain. Under his protection. While he sat in his chamber discussing strategy and order, believing his reputation alone was enough to keep the predators in line. He had been wrong. And this child had paid the price for his complacency. The true alpha rose to his full height, and the command that followed was delivered in a voice that made every shifter in the room straighten reflexively. Cashin. The Panther lieutenant appeared at his side instantly. Take your fastest runners. You have the girl sent now, track it back to the mother. I want her retrieved within the hour and brought to Dr. Marsh at the sanctuary. Tell Marsh I'm invoking priority protocol. Whatever she needs, blood, bone reconstruction, trauma care, she gets it. No expense spared. No questions asked. Cashin nodded and vanished, taking 3 others with him in a blur of motion. Cade. The massive grizzly shifter stepped forward, his expression grim. Take your hunters. Find every blood fang in my territory. Use whatever senses you need, scent, sound, blood trace. I want them brought to the warehouse. Alive. Especially their leader. I want Ragnar conscious and undamaged when I arrive. And if they resist, my king? Theo's smile was colder than winter itself. Then make them understand what happens when you violate the law of absolute protection. Make them understand that mercy is not weakness, it's a choice I'm no longer offering them. The room emptied in seconds as orders were executed with military precision. Theo looked down at Malia, his expression softening marginally. Your mother will be safe. You have my word. The armored SUV tore through the city streets at speeds that would have terrified any human driver. But Theo's hand was steady on the wheel, and Malia was secured in his passenger seat, wrapped in his heavy coat that still carried the warmth of his body heat. The child had stopped crying, her small face pressed against the dark fabric, breathing in the distinctive scent that all true alphas carried, cedar and smoke and something wild that her hindbrain recognized as ultimate safety. She had fallen into an exhausted half-sleep, the primal part of her mind finally accepting that she had found protection. That the apex predator holding her was hers now, not a threat but a shield. Theo drove in silence, his mind already 3 steps ahead, calculating angles and consequences. But underneath the strategy, that newly awakened instinct growled with barely restrained fury. Someone had hurt a child's mother in his territory. Someone had made this little girl run through the streets bleeding and terrified. Someone would pay for that in ways they couldn't begin to imagine. They arrived at a modest apartment above a small flower shop in the South District. The door hung off its hinges. Glass glittered on the sidewalk from a shattered window. Even from the street, Theo could smell the blood. Cashin met them at the entrance, his expression grim. She's alive, my king. But it's bad. Theo lifted Malia gently, carrying her up the narrow stairs. The apartment had been ransacked, furniture overturned, flowers from the shop trampled into the carpet, signs of struggle everywhere. And in the center of it all, Dr. Marsh and her medical team worked with swift precision over a woman who barely looked conscious. Malia Hales was younger than Theo had expected, maybe 30 at most. Her face was swollen and bruised, one arm clearly broken, blood matting her dark hair. But when Malia made a small sound, Elena's eyes, the same brown as her daughter's, flickered open. Baby, she whispered through split lips. Mama. Malia struggled in Theo's arms, and he set her down carefully, letting her rush to her mother's side while staying close enough to catch her if the sight became too much. Dr. Marsh glanced up at Theo, her silver wolf eyes flashing with professional assessment. 3 broken ribs, fractured ulna, severe concussion, internal bleeding. She needs the facility. Now. Theo nodded once. Within minutes, Elena was stabilized, loaded onto a medical transport, and racing toward the sanctuary, a hidden medical center that served the supernatural community with resources and healing abilities no human hospital could match. Malia rode with her mother, holding her hand while Dr. Marsh monitored vitals. Theo stood outside the transport, watching them disappear into the night, when his phone buzzed. Cade's voice was rough with satisfaction. My king, we've located them. All 7 blood fangs, including Ragnar. They're at Morrison's bar on the east border. Drinking. Laughing. Celebrating. The Grizzlies' disgust was palpable. They're bragging about teaching the human her place. The red glow in Theo's eyes flared bright enough to cast shadows in the darkness. How many witnesses in the bar? His voice was utterly calm. It's a shifter establishment. Mostly neutral territory. Maybe 20 patrons. Clear them out. I want the blood fangs isolated. No collateral damage. No excuses. Theo was already moving toward his vehicle. I'm 10 minutes out. And when you arrive? Theo's smile would have made a demon hesitate. When I arrive, Cade, the Bloodfangs are going to learn why they should have feared my mercy more than my wrath. The warehouse sat 30 miles outside the city limits, a concrete fortress that served purposes most of Theo's territory didn't need to know about. It was where problems were solved. Where justice, the kind that couldn't happen in courtrooms or council chambers, was delivered with absolute finality. 6 Bloodfangs knelt on the cold floor, silver-laced chains binding their wrists and ankles. The 7th stood apart, still defiant despite the restraints. Ragnar. The leader. A wolf shifter whose muscles suggested he was used to intimidating through size alone, his scarred face twisted in what he probably thought was a fearless sneer. That sneer had been firmly in place when Cade's hunters had dragged them from Morrison's bar. It had faltered slightly during the transport. Now, as the temperature in the warehouse dropped and every instinct they possessed screamed danger, the arrogance was rapidly draining from their faces. Then Theo Raeken walked through the door. He hadn't fully shifted, his form was still human, still clothed in that dark embroidered coat, but the power that radiated from him made the air itself feel heavy. His eyes burned crimson, casting red light across the concrete walls. Every step he took resonated with alpha dominance so absolute that the 6 kneeling shifters whimpered and pressed their faces to the ground in automatic submission. Even Ragnar took an involuntary step backward. Theo didn't speak immediately. He simply walked the length of the room, his gaze moving from face to face, cataloging each trembling blood fawn with the cold assessment of a predator deciding which prey to take down first. When he finally stopped, it was directly in front of Ragnar. "You don't know why you're here," Theo said quietly. "You think this is about territory. About protection money. About the usual games packs play when they think they can operate in the shadows of my domain." Ragnar's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. "Let me clarify." Theo's voice dropped even lower, that dangerous rumble that made every shifter present want to flee. "This isn't about territory. This is about the fact that you violated the first law, the only law that matters in my empire. You used your strength against the defenseless. You beat a human woman in front of her child. You traumatized a 7-year-old girl so badly that she ran bleeding through my city, terrified and desperate, begging strangers for help." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. A pink hair ribbon, stained with blood. Malia had been wearing it when she burst into his council chamber. It had fallen when he'd lifted her into the SUV, and he'd retrieved it without thinking. "This belongs to Malia Hales," Theo continued, holding the ribbon where every blood fawn could see it. "She gave this to me as a promise that I would save her mother. Do you understand what you've done? You didn't just break my law. You forced a child to make bargains with predators because you were too pathetic to find honest work." One of the kneeling shifters began to sob. Another was shaking so hard the chains rattled. Ragnar finally found his voice, though it came out weaker than he probably intended. "She was in our collection zone. She owed you nothing." The words cracked like a whip. "She was a human florist trying to survive. And you, all of you, decided that gave you the right to deliver violence." Theo's eyes flared brighter. "Who gave you permission to operate in my territory? Who sanctioned the bloodfangs?" Silence. "That's what I thought." Theo smiled, and it was the most terrifying expression any of them had ever seen. Rogues. Operating without charter, without oversight, without honor. That makes this simpler. He turned his attention fully to Ragnar. You're the leader. Which means you made the call. You gave the order. You decided Malia Hales and her daughter were acceptable casualties in your pathetic power play. Ragnar's defiance crumbled completely. Please, we didn't know she was under your protection. Every human in my territory is under my protection, Theo interrupted softly. That's what protection means. That's what order means. And you destroyed both. Theo had arranged for witnesses. Not the cowering bloodfangs chained on the warehouse floor, but representatives from every major pack in his territory. They stood in the shadows along the walls, wolves, bears, panthers, even a pair of fox shifters who served as his diplomatic corps. This wasn't just about punishing rogues. This was about sending a message that would echo through every den, every pack house, every territory from coast to coast. The true Alpha King was no longer the cold, detached ruler who governed through calculated distance. The Protector had returned. And he was absolutely merciless. Ragnar straightened as much as his chains would allow, desperately grasping for the bravado that had carried him this far. You want to talk about order? Fine. Let's negotiate. We can pay restitution. We can relocate outside your borders. We can. Silence. The single word carried such absolute alpha command that Ragnar's jaw snapped shut mid-sentence. His eyes went wide as he realized he physically couldn't speak, couldn't even whimper. The true alpha's voice had stripped away his ability to make sound. Theo stepped closer, his presence filling the warehouse like a gathering storm. When he spoke, his voice carried to every witness, every shifter present, ensuring that what happened here would be repeated in every corner of his empire. You think this is a negotiation, Ragnar? You think you have something to offer me? The red glow in Theo's eyes intensified. Let me explain what you are. You're a coward who beats defenseless women. You're a bully who traumatizes children. You're a rogue who operates without honor, without code, without the basic decency that separates shifters from mindless beasts. He began to pace, and every eye followed him. You violated the law of absolute protection, the foundation upon which my entire territory rests. You extorted humans under the lie of offering safety. You used violence not for defense, not for survival, but because you enjoyed the power it gave you over those weaker than yourself. Ragnar tried to shake his head, to protest, but the alpha command still held him frozen. And worst of all, Theo continued, his voice dropping to that dangerous quiet, you made a 7-year-old girl believe that strength means cruelty. That power means terror. That the strong have the right to destroy the weak simply because they can. You didn't just break my law, Ragnar. You betrayed everything that separates us from the monsters humans fear we are. Theo stopped directly in front of the rogue leader, and the temperature plummeted. Frost formed on the chains. The witnesses pressed back against the walls. Here is my decree, and it is absolute. The blood fangs are dissolved effective immediately. Every member of your pack is stripped of their association. Your name, your influence, your legacy, erased. His words fell like hammer blows. Your treasury, every cent you've extorted from innocent people, will be seized and redistributed to the victims of your shakedowns. Every business you've terrorized will receive restitution. He leaned in close, his voice now meant only for Ragnar. And you will live. Not because you deserve mercy, but because I want you to survive with the knowledge that you had power once, and a true alpha took it away with nothing but words. No claws. No fangs. Just the absolute authority you thought you could challenge. Theo straightened and addressed the room. Let this be known across every territory, under my rule, the strong protect the weak. That is not sentiment. That is not weakness. That is the only order worth maintaining. And anyone who believes otherwise will face the same fate as the Bloodfangs. He released the Alpha command. Ragnar collapsed forward, gasping. Get them out of my sight, Theo ordered. Scatter them to the borders. Make sure every pack knows what they did and what it cost them. The witnesses began to file out, already composing the reports that would spread through the supernatural world like wildfire. The true Alpha King had returned to his primal roots. And the territory would never be the same. Dawn broke over the city in shades of amber and gold, painting the skyline with the promise of a new day. Theo stood on the balcony of his private office, watching the sunrise while his phone buzzed with incoming reports. He'd been awake for nearly 24 hours, but true alphas didn't require sleep the way ordinary shifters did. And even if they did, he doubted he could have rested until he knew the outcome. Dr. Marsh's message came through first, clinical but carrying an undercurrent of relief that only those who knew her well could detect. Patient Malia Hales is stable and responsive. Broken bones are being treated with accelerated healing protocols. Internal bleeding stopped. Concussion resolving. She's asking for her daughter. Prognosis: full recovery expected within 72 hours. Theo released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. The tightness in his chest, that primal protective instinct that had roared to life when Malia grabbed his sleeve, eased slightly. The mother would survive. The child wouldn't lose the only parent she had. The second message came from Cade, brutally efficient as always. All 7 blood fangs processed and relocated to border territories. Treasury seized, $847,000 in cash, plus assets. Victim list compiled, 23 businesses, 8 families. Restitution distribution begins today. Ragnar was last seen heading west. No pack will take him. He's alone. Good. Theo had meant what he said. Death would have been too quick, too merciful for what Ragnar had done. Living as a rogue without pack, without purpose, without the power he'd abused, that was justice. That was consequence. The third message made him smile, though the expression was gentler than any his lieutenants would have recognized. It was from the sanctuary, a photo. Malia asleep in a chair beside her mother's bed, small hand clasped in Elena's bandaged one. The child's face was finally peaceful, the terror replaced by the deep sleep of someone who knew they were safe. Theo forwarded the image to his secure server, then opened his emergency broadcast system, the network that reached every pack leader, every territory manager, every shifter of rank within his domain. What he was about to send would be read aloud in council chambers, pack houses, and den meetings across 7 states. He typed with deliberate precision. By decree of true Alpha King Theo Raeken, effective immediately. The law of absolute protection is hereby reinforced and clarified. Every human, every non-shifter, every being within this territory, regardless of species, wealth, or status, exists under the explicit protection of this throne. Any shifter who uses strength against the defenseless, who extorts the vulnerable, who brings terror to the innocent, will face the full weight of Alpha justice. This is not negotiable. This is not subject to interpretation. The strong do not prey upon the weak in my domain. The powerful do not exploit those without claws or fangs. That is not order, that is chaos. And chaos will not be tolerated. The Blood Fangs learned this lesson at the cost of everything they possessed. Let their fates serve as permanent reminder: protection is not weakness. Mercy is not sentiment. These are the foundations upon which civilization is built. Any pack leader who questions this decree may present themselves to my council for clarification. Any shifter who violates it will join Ragnar in exile. This territory was built on strength. But strength without honor is just brutality. And I did not build an empire to rule over beasts. We are better than our base instincts. We are stronger than our predatory nature. And we will prove it every day by choosing protection over predation. By order of the true Alpha. He sent it before he could second-guess the words. Within minutes, his phone exploded with responses. Some were supportive. Some were cautiously optimistic. A few questioned whether the cold, calculated king they'd known for 15 years had been replaced by someone else entirely. Let them wonder. Let them talk. The message was clear: the true Alpha King had rediscovered his heart, and his empire would be stronger for it. 3 months passed like the turning of seasons, and the territory transformed in ways both subtle and profound. Malia Hales reopened her flower shop with a security system that would have impressed a bank vault, installed at the true Alpha's insistence and expense. The apartment above received similar upgrades, though Elena had initially protested that it was too much. Theo had simply looked at her with those dark eyes that occasionally flickered red and said, "Your daughter saved me. This is the least I can do." Elena never argued about security again. The changes in Theo Raeken were noticed by everyone in his inner circle, though no one dared comment directly. The council meetings still ran with military precision. Territory disputes were still resolved with calculated efficiency. The true Alpha's authority remained absolute, his word still law across 7 states. But now, every Tuesday evening, the king's schedule held a block marked simply as personal time. His lieutenants knew better than to interrupt it. Theo would arrive at the flower shop just as Elena was closing, often carrying something small, a book he thought Malia might enjoy, or pastries from the bakery 3 blocks over that she'd mentioned liking. The first few visits had been awkward, this powerful shifter trying to navigate the simple domesticity of a human child's life. But Malia had made it easy. She'd simply taken his hand and dragged him upstairs to show him her homework, or her drawings, or the stray cat she'd been feeding on the fire escape. Elena would make tea and watch with barely concealed amazement as the most feared creature in the supernatural world sat cross-legged on her living room floor, helping her 7-year-old daughter build elaborate cities out of wooden blocks. Sometimes his phone would buzz with urgent pack business, and he'd glance at it, then deliberately set it aside. Whatever crisis it was could wait an hour. The little girl had changed something fundamental in him, and everyone could see it. Cashin noticed it first during a particularly tense negotiation with a rival Alpha. The other shifter had made a thinly veiled threat about collateral damage, and instead of responding with cold calculation, Theo's eyes had flashed red, that protective glow that now appeared whenever someone threatened innocence. The negotiation had ended in under 5 minutes, with the rival Alpha backing down completely. "He's not weaker," Cashin reported to the others later. "He's more dangerous. Because now he actually cares what happens to people. And a true Alpha who cares is a true Alpha who'll burn down the world to protect what's his." Dr. Marsh saw it in the way Theo visited the sanctuary's pediatric wing now, something he'd never done before. He'd stop by recovery rooms, and children who'd been terrified of the powerful Alpha found themselves at ease when that gentle red glow appeared in his eyes, the same glow that meant Malia was safe, that meant protection was absolute. Cade witnessed it during patrol briefings when Theo began asking questions he'd never asked before. Are there families in that district? How many children? His strategies had always prioritized minimizing casualties, but now he genuinely cared about the answer, not just the tactical implications. The entire court saw it the day Malia appeared at a formal pack gathering, holding Theo's hand with the fearless confidence of a child who knew she belonged there. She wore a new dress, pink, naturally, and a silver pendant bearing the true Alpha's seal. Not as jewelry, but as a declaration. This child was under his personal protection. Anyone who threatened her answered to him directly. Elena had worried it was too much, that Malia was too young for such attention. But Theo had knelt down to the little girl's level, that familiar gesture he'd first made in the warehouse, and asked, "Do you want to meet my pack, little one?" Malia had nodded enthusiastically, then surprised everyone by hugging him, this small human child wrapping her arms around the neck of the true Alpha King without hesitation or fear. The red glow in his eyes had softened to something almost gentle. He'd hugged her back carefully, mindfully aware of his strength, and when he stood with her in his arms, every shifter present understood, this wasn't political theater. This was family. The whispers spread through the supernatural world. The true Alpha King had been changed by a human child. Some saw it as weakness. Those were the ones who didn't understand true strength. Because Malia Hales hadn't just found the most powerful shapeshifter in the world that desperate Tuesday evening. She had reminded him what that power was for. Not domination. Not control. Not the cold, calculated order that kept emotions at bay. Protection. Pure, fierce, unwavering protection of those who couldn't protect themselves. She had forced the true Alpha King to reclaim the instinct he'd buried 15 years ago, the heart he'd locked away to survive the wars. She'd proven that mercy wasn't a flaw that invited chaos, it was the foundation upon which real civilization was built. That strength without compassion was just tyranny. That a ruler who couldn't feel was just a dictator waiting to fall. Theo Raeken was still the most feared creature in 7 states. His word was still absolute law. His authority remained unquestioned. But now, when he looked at the vulnerable, at the children, the families, the innocent people just trying to survive in a world of predators, his eyes would glow with that protective red light. And everyone knew, the true Alpha's heart had returned. And his empire was stronger for it. The end.